After training hundreds of soldiers, coaches, and entrepreneurs in mental strength, I'm going to share with you how you can scientifically test how gritty you are within 5 minutes. I'm going to cover the 12-question grit test and a few tricks you can use today to develop your mental strength. Before we go into the grit test, I want you to understand why this is so important and the research behind it. So we're going to look at some research done by an Angela Duckworth, and she says that grit, the tendency to sustain interest and effort toward very long-term goals. She also says that this research focuses on two traits that predict achievement: grit and self-control. Grit we already talked about, and self-control, she says, is the voluntary regulation of impulses in the presence of monetarily gratifying temptations. Okay, fancy words. In Unbreakable Mind, we talk about grit or mental strength or mental resiliency as the ability to keep promises to yourself. That's it. So we say, hey, I have this goal, I'm going to go out and do it, and then you actually go out and do it. So that's a very simple explanation of just saying, hey, I'm going to do this thing and I'm actually doing it. And unlike talent or intelligence, mental strength or grit is something that we can train, something we can develop. If you ever listen to Huberman or any of those, they talk about that mid-cingulate cortex. I probably screwed it up, but it's a part of your brain that really reacts to you doing things that are not just uncomfortable, but gives you fear, anxiety, and doubt, and you do it anyway. And you will stimulate that part of your brain. If I remember correctly, it actually even grows. And it's good to know that it doesn't, you can't just do hard things. Like going to the gym and do one extra rep at the gym doesn't build that mental strength. It just makes you physically stronger and sweaty and smell bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, of course. Physical strength should obviously be a part of your routine, but doing the things that you are familiar with and just doing it harder isn't building mental strength. There's also something fascinating because one of the biggest predictors of success in any direction of your life is going to be IQ and talent. But the thing is, like, if I have really good IQ and you have medium IQ and we're going to play chess, for example, and you practice chess for 5 years and I've practiced chess for 10 minutes, you're going to beat me. So the beautiful thing is here that IQ is a really good predictor of things and it really makes people learn things faster and move faster in life. But if you niche down into a skill, whatever it may be, then you will outperform anyone who hasn't practiced that skill. And that's the beautiful part of this. And the same thing goes with mental strength. If you want to be mentally stronger, which you should, because I think it's the second biggest predictor of achieving your goals, then you can practice that and learn. And that's what this research is all about. So in contrary to what maybe Jordan Peterson or other people might say, that IQ is the biggest predictor of success, Angela Duckworth here says that grit is often a better predictor of success than IQ or raw ability. Because the idea of just going after something and not stopping when everybody else has stopped, if you could just endure longer than everyone else, then you'll be the one staying around. And this, I can see this often in military selections or any type of hard challenge. It's not usually the ones who are the smartest or the most fit that stick around until the end. It's usually the ones who just decide that this is what I'm going to do, and they decide also to never let themselves down. I said I'm going to do this, and either people have to pick me off the court or I'll be there. So if the race or the event is just long enough, then they will be there at the end, no matter how long. And life is kind of the same way, right? Life doesn't end tomorrow, hopefully not, but it extends for many, many years. So if you can just keep going towards your goal, you can have that grit, then you will outperform most people in that arena, because most people will give up after a while. So even if they have higher intelligence, they have more talent, they're smarter than you, whatever, if you just stick with it, you'll most likely outperform them. And I know most of you guys who are on this show, you have high ambitions, big goals, you really want to achieve big stuff. And I also know that some of you struggle with this consistency part. So hopefully this grit test here will give you an indicator of where you're at, maybe discover some of your limitations so you can improve that. And one of the common mistakes I see is that grit or mental strength is something that is intangible. It's just something that you grew up with, that people just are mentally tough. But we can actually test with a very simple little questionnaire how gritty you are, what the probability is that you will stick to your long-term goal. And if you realize, wait, here's where I'm failing, here's what I'm breaking down, then that's a good opportunity for you to maybe work on that area so that you can get back on track and keep going towards your goals. And there are a multitude of reasons why we get back off track. One, maybe the vision isn't so clear. We don't have an idea exactly where we're going. Or two, the path is very unclear. Or three, there's so many distractions along the path that we just forget where the heck we were going, right? There's so many reasons to get off track, but what signifies someone mentally strong is that they will always have that vision, that view ahead of them of where they're going, and they're able to see the path and stick to it. That doesn't mean that they're going to take that goal and say that goal is not relevant, and they're going to shift over here and then go towards that. But it happens with intention, it happens with purpose, not just by, oh, a piece of candy, I'm going to go over here, right? The next thing here is that I want to talk about is that I see this quite often, that just doing hard things or staying busy will just make you tough. Well, doing hard things just for doing hard things doesn't make a lot of sense. I often talk about just standing in the rain. It's hard and it's uncomfortable. It doesn't really give you anything back, right? It doesn't make you mentally stronger. You're just cold now. And that leads us back to that research about that part of your brain, which is tightly connected to grit and endurance and mental strength. That part needs to be stimulated. And it doesn't get stimulated by just doing like one more rep at the gym or just doing things that are uncomfortable. That is also a big reason why in Unbreakable Mind we have transitioned from the comfort zone model, where you hear that you're supposed to leave the comfort zone and then learn a bunch of things, and that's how you grow, right? We have left that model to the side because we believe it's broken, and instead we talk about the familiar zone and the adventure zone. So you will go into your familiar zone is everything that you're used to, right? That could be the gym. You go there, you do an extra rep. It's really hard. You really have to push hard. It's familiar to you. You know how that works. It's the same thing over and over again. It doesn't give you any fear, anxiety, and doubt, and therefore it will not build any mental strength. But once you leave the familiar zone, you go outside of that one, you end up in what we call the adventure zone. And so what is an adventure? Well, an adventure, of course, is something that is unknown. It is exciting. It gives you that sense of fear, gives you a little bit of anxiety. What's going to happen? We have to deal with the unknown. And it makes you doubt a little bit. Should I really do this? Right? So once you enter that zone, you go into adventure. That's where you have all these experiences. That's where you get to challenge yourself and you get to understand new things about yourself that you didn't know. You get to experience your limits, right? But then comes the second problem. That's because, and this is what throws a lot of people off. They think you have to leave this familiar zone to grow. But actually, you grow inside of your familiar zone. You grow not at the gym, right? You go to the gym to work out your muscles, but your muscles actually grow when you go back to sleep. So that's why sleep is so incredibly important, right? You go back to sleep, your muscles grow, your brain makes the new connections. So it's really important you go from the familiar zone out on your adventure and then come back home. Because if you don't get back home into the familiar zone, you don't get the lessons, you don't get to debrief, you don't get to sleep so your muscles can grow, you don't get the benefits. You only get deterioration. So if you go outside into adventures and you live your entire life there, you will sooner or later end up in burnout. And I think that is what's happening to a lot of people. So you can't build this mental strength by going out on the adventure, doing these difficult fear, anxiety, and doubt-driven things, but you need to come back home. You need to come back to that recovery position, into your familiar zone where you can recover, debrief, rejuvenate, and learn the lessons you need, right? And grow that mental strength. And then you can go out again on a new adventure. And the adventure zone isn't like a practical one. The adventure zone could be having a conversation with someone, right? But if it's a conversation that is, in front of 200 people, but for you, it's just another day at the office, then it doesn't really challenge you, does it? But if it's a one-on-one conversation that gives you that sense of, what is this person going to think? Are we going to end up in a fight? And it gives you that a little bit of fear, anxiety, and doubt. Then that is something that most likely will challenge you in the adventure zone, and that will build your mental strength. So the key here is to look for those things that triggers your emotions. So, and this becomes relevant because if you're on this path towards your goal, people who are mentally strong or gritty, they will come up to these obstacles, which are this fear, anxiety, and doubt along the way. And they will say, hey, you know what? I guess it's just time to climb this one. And then they go there. But if you're not mentally strong, you'll see that thing and you will deviate just slightly, to make it less uncomfortable. And then you will do the things that you're already used to, the things you're already familiar with. So instead of having that tough conversation you need to have, you're just going to go to the gym instead and work out really hard and, be tough. So then the question, of course, is, well, how do I know that I'm doing the right things? How do I know that I'm actually mentally strong or gritty and I am one of those who are moving toward my goal? Or maybe I am the person who actually deviates too much. So that's where I think this test really comes into place. It's one indicator of where you might be at. It's definitely not the entire picture of you as a person. We'll do more of that in Unbreakable Mind, where we do personality tests and we run you through a bunch of challenges so you get to understand yourself. But I think this grit test has a place to do a quick self-test and self-assessment to see if we are extreme in any sense, if we're extremely lacking in grit, or if we're like, holy crap, I really stick to my goals. And I really think you should do this test. It's all free. It's on Angela Duckworth's website. I'll put a link down below. Unfortunately, I can't share with you the spreadsheet I have created that calculates this all automatically because that's against her copyright. But I'll put a link below so you can go to her website and check it out. I'm going to go through 3 questions here, and maybe that'll be like a quick test for you. And if you feel curious and you want to do the full one, just go to the link below. But let's have a little look here what's in this grit test and what she thinks are interesting questions to ask to figure out whether or not you have grit. The first question is, I often set a goal, but later choose to pursue a different one. So this is about this long-term perspective. So you put up a goal, but then you halfway change your mind. This is one that I struggle with. It's a really tricky one because it's so easy to go down a path and then you have to figure out whether or not it is reasonable now to switch direction. Because as we go on our path, like for me in business, for example, I learn so many things along the way that it changes my perspective on things and which orients myself towards a different goal, right? Adapting is a good thing, but if you switch too often, then you're not adapting, you're just flopping around. And the balance between those two can be tricky. And that's where I think the next question becomes so interesting. The next one is, I have achieved a goal that took years of work. So this would be the idea of having this big goal, this vision in front of us, and then all these micro goals were kind of like pinball towards, right? So if you should stick to this goal you have in front of you, or if you should pivot or do something different, then just think about, hey, are both of these goals leading me towards the bigger goal? Then if yes, then that bouncing around is probably not a big problem. But if you say, hey, you know what, if I do this thing here, it's not actually going to lead me to my big goal, then you should probably skip that alternative and bounce around within the goals or within the pivots that leads you to the bigger goal. So all of this, of course, comes down to having a goal. Like if you don't have that, then it's really hard to make decisions. And that leads me to the third question. I have difficulty maintaining my focus on projects that take more than a few months to complete. So the idea here is that you score yourself from very much like me to not at all like me, right? I have difficulty maintaining my focus on projects that take more than a few months to complete. So you see here that the idea of grit is this long-term dedication to a goal. It is like the marshmallow test we talked about before. When they gave kids one marshmallow now, or asked them, hey, you can take one now or you can get 2, but you're going to have to wait for the second one. So the kids who took 2 instead of 1 now, they were the ones who succeeded in life. They were the ones who were able to deal with delayed gratification instead of instant gratification. And that's what this is all about here as well. It's about setting up that goal, working towards it, even though it's a little bit of pain, a little bit of suffering, because you know that you'll get 2 marshmallows at the end of this. So if those questions kind of piqued your interest a little bit, go to the link below, check out her study and check out her grit test, do that thing. And then we're going to go now into, okay, what do you do with the results? Let's say you have room for improvements, which most of us have. Then I want to give you a few tricks or one main challenge that you can implement today to start building that mental strength. Here's how you can use everyday events to develop your 3 arenas. Your mind, your body, and your team. so you can develop extreme mental strength. First, you got to walk through your days and everyday life. You got to identify the situation, because I don't want you to waste energy on things that doesn't matter. Like, we can't turn everything that happens in your life into a challenge. Then you just burn out, right? It's what we talked about before. You got to go into the adventure zone, then come back home and recover and rest, get the lessons and grow stronger. Then you got to do the most important thing. You got to go out and do it. You got to get that challenge. You got to get that lessons, because if you don't do the thing, you won't get the lessons. If you think about the thing, or you read about the thing, or you talk about the thing, in Unbreakable Mind, we are incredibly action oriented. And I want you to get out there, do things, because you'll either get the result that you wanted or the lessons that you needed. Then after you've done that, you've been into the adventure zone, you've had this experience, maybe fear, anxiety, and doubt, you come back home, you do a debrief. And this is to make sure that you learn the right lessons and you get some lessons out of it. So when you go out next time, you go there with a new perspective and improved self-confidence. So how do you identify the challenge? What is a good challenge to build mental strength? Here's how we like to see it. The event or the thing that pops up in your head must induce a little bit of fear, anxiety, and doubt. And this ensures that you are in the adventure zone, that you are facing something new, something uncomfortable, something that you don't really want to deal with. This makes it really good. I'm going to give you a pretty ridiculous example, but hopefully this will give you a good idea of how this works. So let's say I'm getting the receipt back after buying lunch, and it says that I've been overcharged by 50 cents. So 50 cents is nothing. Mostly you would just like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to let it go. But then you think about yourself going back there and saying, hey, I want my 50 cents back. And for some people, that would be a little bit awkward. Maybe like, what are they going to think about me? Are they going to think I'm like super poor, that I really need this 50 cents? So that it might create this awkward, maybe a little bit of fear of asking for that. Maybe that anxiety is like, and then you start doubting yourself that you shouldn't do this. So now that we have identified this situation, I want you to ask yourself, is it safe to do? Because if it's safe to do, that removes all the legit excuses. So let's say returning, going back to ask for these 50 cents means you're going to have to climb Mount Everest, fight lions, and, wrestle bears, right? Then it'll be like, it's a legit excuse not to do it, because you might actually die from it, or you most certainly will die from it. But if it's safe to do, like, nothing's going to actually happen if you go there and ask for your 50 cents. That means it's all a mind game now. It's all a question of whether or not you're able to take the step beyond those obstacles, being a little bit uncomfortable, being a little bit facing your own fear and doing it anyway. So you identify a good challenge by saying it induces fear, anxiety, and doubt, however it may come upon you during the day, and it's safe to do. Then you just do it, right? This is not about the 50 cents. This is about the experience you will have. It's about facing those fears. Then you got to get back home. You got to debrief that. You got to say, okay, what the heck did I learn from this, other than it being awkward and you got your 50 cents back? Yay. So first off, what was the goal? Like in this case, I wanted to go back to the register, ask for my 50 cents, and I wanted to stay calm while doing it and not make a fool out of myself. The second question is, what actually happened? Well, I actually went up there, I was shaking a little bit, and I stumbled on my words because I was afraid that I would look like a fool, so that I actually looked like a fool. And the third question is, what did I learn? I put this in 3 buckets. What do I want to continue doing? What do I want to stop doing? And what do I want to start doing? So next time, I'm going to ask someone a very uncomfortable question. When I feel all of these emotions, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to relax for 5 seconds. I'm going to relax my shoulders, my body, and I'm going to rehearse what I'm going to say, and then I'm going to do it. So that would be a really good debrief that you can do. And this debrief template is something that's used in the military, in government agencies, when you need to learn and need to get the most out of the situation you've been in. If you skip this step, chances are you'll just repeat the same pattern, or you will avoid doing a thing you need to do. You can even use a debrief for the times when you decided not to take on the challenge. And then you can figure out whether you did not take on the challenge because you were afraid of doing it, or if you did not take on the challenge because you had a legit reason to do it. And the debrief will give you tools to do that. Okay, those were the things I wanted to talk to you guys about today. This has come up in the community, so I wanted to share this with you. Take the grit test, use that little challenge framework that I just gave you, and start building that mental strength. And whatever you do, keep challenging yourself, because growth doesn't happen by chance, it happens by challenge.